Okay, so this brain teaser is going to be lowest number in a array. Now this is one of the first brain teasers that you're probably likely to encounter. So let's just get right into it. Now before we step into the code, and I think with any of these brain teasers, it's always good, and even just when you're coding, just to have a piece of paper and a pen around. So you can always kind of draw out your strategy on a piece of paper and then go ahead and try to code it. So let's kind of look at this first. So let's say I have an array of numbers. And I want to find the lowest one in this array. Now, as a computer solving this problem, you can really only do one thing at a time. So the trick here is I just need to go through and compare these numbers, but I need to kind of set this first one as the lowest. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep track of the lowest number. And I'm just going to say, hey, right now the lowest is currently 0, just the first one in the array. And then I'm going to go and compare it to the next value. So I'm going to compare these two. Is -2 less than 0? Yes, it is. So then we'll need to swap that one out. So now -2 is the lowest. And then I compare -2 to 4. Well, -2 is still the lowest. Compare it to 5. Well, -2 is now still the lowest. And then go to compare it to -4. And -4 is the lowest. So with this, I have to go through each element and compare this. So now that we kind of have our solution, we're going to assume the first thing is the lowest, and then we're just going to go through each one and compare and keep track of the lowest. I think we can go now and code this out. So let's just step into VS Code. And, I can kind of even use that example of, let's come in and create this array. Like let test array equals, 0 to, or is it -2, 4, 5, and -4. So let's write a function. Let's call this find lowest. Now this is going to take in an array of numbers. And as we stated, we're going to create a variable called lowest, and we're just going to assign this to the first value in our array. And then we want to go through each item, so we'll use the Foreach method. Go through each number and we're going to compare it. And we'll see if our number is less than our lowest, then we're going to set our lowest to equal the number. So that's us going through each number and then swapping out when it is the lowest. And then the last thing we need to remember is just to return the lowest after we're done. So if I run this find lowest and pass it this test array, let's go ahead and put this in a variable. Let lowest equal that. I'm expecting this to be -4. Let's go ahead and run that node. BT, I'm calling this BT for Brainteaser.js. Now there we go. Now I'm running into a little error. It's grabbing -2. Now my find lowest is actually correct. Something that's going on here is right here, this last little bit. I forgot a comma. Well, since I forgot a comma, this is actually going to do the math, 5 minus 4. So this is really just 1. So actually -2 right now is my lowest. But let's go and change that to be 5 and put in the comma there. And now try this out. And there we go. There's our -4. So this would be a good implementation of this. But let's look at another implementation of this using the reduce method and kind of make this a little more interesting and see how we could do this with the reduce method. So once again, let's go back to the drawing board. I'm going to delete this. Now the reduce method is similar to that like the for each. We go through each thing in the array and we perform a function. But the reduce method is going to, what that function returns is called the accumulator. And we can keep track of a certain value and have that be, and keep track of this value called the accumulator. So let's look at what this means. So if I have an array, say like 1, 2, 3, and I call the dot reduce method, I can actually pass this a function that has an accumulator and then the number. We go through each number. And this inner function that we pass, you know, we can do work, and then what it returns, what this inner function returns is going to be the next accumulator for the next function call. So let's see how we can use this in reduce and how what I'm thinking about doing to use reduce to find the lowest number. So let's once again say we have this array 1, 2, 3, and then -1, and then 0 or something like that. So what I'm going to do is the reduce method, we're going to go through each thing and we're going to keep track. The accumulator is actually going to be the lowest value. And what we can do with the reduce function, so if I have an array, let's just call this like array. If I call array.reduce, you know, I'm going to give it this function that has the accumulator and then the number, then we can do stuff. But there's actually a second value to this reduce function, which is the initial value of my accumulator. Now, kind of like we did how we set the lowest value to the first index, I'm going to do the same thing here where the first value, or I'm going to set my accumulator to the first value. So that's going to be, my accumulator is going to start off whatever the first value is. And then for my reduce function, we can have our accumulator and our number. And then this one, what I can simply do is I can just check, hey, is my accumulator, which is really good, the thing that's keeping track of my lowest number, is that I can just check if my number is less than my accumulator. And then if it is, I'm going to return the number. If not, I'm going to return the accumulator. So let's look at this one in code and see if this makes a little more sense. So the reduce function is very powerful. It just takes a little time to getting used to. So I'm going to do another function, find lowest, reduce. Once again, this can just take in an array of numbers. So yeah, I'm just going to take my numbers and I'm going to do this dot reduce function. And then we can go in, pass it this anonymous function inside of here. So like I said, this first thing is going to be what we call the accumulator. I can call this something else. I might even want to call this lowest because that's what it's going to be keeping track of. And then the second argument is going to be the current item we're iterating over, which would be the current number. And then the second value to this function is what I want the starting value of this accumulator to be. So like I said, I want, just kind of like we did in this function where we set we kind of defaulted our lowest to the first thing in the array. I'm going to do that same thing right here. And then inside of here, I can check, hey, you know, we can just do this as a ternary. Is my number less than the lowest? If it is, I want that number to be the new accumulator. Because remember what this function returns, and I need the return keyword, what this inner function returns is going to be this accumulator for the next function call, which in this case we're calling lowest. So if the number is not less than the lowest, then that means I just want to keep that the same. So go through this, because these two are really doing the same thing, or very similar thing, where we're just assuming the first thing in the array is the lowest number, and then we're going through each thing and keeping track of and comparing, and then if we need to, we swap out the values. So let's just see if this works. I'm gonna just copy this. We'll call this let lowest one, and this is find lowest reduced. So this is returning undefined now. Now something about this function, remember here in my upper one, I'm returning lowest, but this find lowest reduce, I'm not returning anything. So this number reduce function, it goes through each of the things, you know, and kind of keeps track of that accumulator. And then at the very end, that is what this reduce returns. So I actually need to return the value of this once this reduce function completes. And there we go. There we have -4. So when it comes to brain teasers, it's just really about getting them right. That's the first thing you want to do. But it's also fun to try to think about, and useful to think about different ways to solve the same problem. And that's where you can use functions like Foreach, reduce. There's other ways. We could have used the for loop. So that's something you can maybe try on your own, is do this using a for loop. But I think that's good for now. I will throw this code in the comments, or in a link in the comments, and yeah, let me know if you have any questions.